Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I first want to thank Bill and Dion for this invitation to speak to you today. In all the years I've spent in one role or another, be it as a regulator of the railways or subsequently working for one of them, I've always believed that the ag sector was special in many ways, certainly for the contribution to the economy, but there was also in the commercial relationships something a bit different than other shipping or shippers, which is the fact that you contract with grain companies, you don't contract with railways directly, and we contract with grain companies, we don't contract with you directly. And to me, this lack of connection, I think, has been the source through the years for some misunderstanding. And I hope that my presence today will assist in better understanding each other and hopefully moving positively about it. The current environment, the US tariffs, what's happening to our economy requires a collective effort. And we're certainly part of the Team Canada effort. And I'm glad that my invitation today speaks to that commitment as well from your part. So thank you very much for that. Thank you. So today, I want to speak a little bit about my association, the general trends that we see, and the common interests that our respective industries have. And there are many given the current environment. First, information. When I started this job a year ago, I really felt that the association was not doing a great job at advertising what railways do. So basically what we've developed is a series of websites and newsletters and subscription opportunities that you can all take advantage of. All the members of my association are available there. I have associate members, which are essentially industry related to rail, that are members of my association that provide all kinds of service. The staff, essentially, my team and myself. The weekly traffic dashboard, I'm very happy about that and frankly proud of it, because this provides you the weekly performance of the Canadian railways for all traffic. And I was clear to my staff that I wanted a special section for grain movement. It's there. You can have a look at it. And I will show some of it later during my presentation. You can also subscribe to updates. We publish all kinds of documents and information. And I really believe that it could be beneficial to everybody to have access to that. In any event, it costs nothing. You just put your email address there and you keep receiving those emails, and you can do with that information what you want. The RAC represents 60 railway companies, passenger and freight, millions of passengers annually, and basically moving $400 billion worth of goods. 50% of the tonnage exported by Canada is moved by rail. 50%. We've got 40,000 kilometers of freight lines. We pay $2.7 billion in taxes of all kinds, be it federal, provincial, and municipal. We have we support jobs, 200,000 jobs, direct jobs. We move in Canada, we originate 5.7 million carloads every year. And we reinvest in our country $4.5 billion every year. Those reinvestments are in essentially infrastructure, rail tracks, maintenance, and moving stock, railway equipment. So that investment is significant. Only the oil and gas industry reinvests more of its gross revenue than the rail industry. And in that respect, the Canadian railways are very similar to what's happening in the US. US railways have approximately the same degree of reinvestment. So that's the Canadian network. I'm sure you're aware of it and you know it as well. It's a broad network that covers, many points and many in many directions. And I guess what's missing here is the fact that both CN and CPKC do have a network that goes to the US, and more recently, CPKC now goes all the way to Mexico. So the reach of the Canadian railways mean that from any point on this map, you can ship to any point served by those railways in the US and Mexico. So that provides a very powerful opportunity and market options for products. And, in the Canadian rail industry, we really believe that what's happening with the US is a moment, that the long-term logical and commercial reason will prevail, and that things will be normalized. In other words, we are two very big markets. We are important for the US, both for the exportation and the importation of products, and therefore the practicality and the commercial reason will prevail in the end. So the long-term support that the Canadian railways bring to your industry is significant. So that's taken from the website I was speaking about earlier. I basically wanted to show to the general public the key factors and the key performance of railways. So you have a similar graph for all traffic, but this one is in particular for Western grain shipments. And there's a couple of very interesting points, but I guess what it shows is very simple. You have the dotted lines that shows the last 3-year average, so that there's a benchmark to compare the current environment. You have the thick red line that is the actual performance. And then you've got the temperatures, that showing essentially how or whether those temperatures are impacting rails. I'm sure you're aware that cold temperatures have a direct impact on railway performance, and this is for safety reasons. Essentially, below -25, railways need to shorten their train lengths and reduce speed. If you don't do that, you create a big safety hazards because the brakes are not as effective. And second, if you run too fast, you run the risk of breaking your tracks and derail more. So because of that, the temperature indicators there provide that additional information that most of the time informs as to why some tonnages move less than usual. I also want to point to a couple of things because for those of you like me who have been around for a while, you may remember that in 2014, the government imposed on Canadian railways an obligation to move minimum tonnage. Both CN and CPKC at the time had to move during summer months 520, I believe, 520 metric tons each. So a bit over 1 million ton per week. And in the winter months, it was lower than that. Now, what's remarkable of the current performance is that without any regulations, railways have been moving essentially 50% more grain than what the order was in 2014. All of this without any regulatory intervention. And the reason for that are numerous. First, generally speaking, the ag community has been performing better than the Canadian economy in general. The growth of your industry compared to the Canadian economy in recent years has been significant. We've been flat for the last 10 years, Canada globally, all sectors, but your sector has grown. And railways have been able, thanks to a deregulation of the MRE rules, that has allowed railways to buy more equipment, more high capacity rolling stock, to perform better and move more grain, matching the increased demand that your industry delivered. So to some degree, I would say that if I want to point to a success here, I would point to this one, because there are very simple realities in logistics chain. If your transportation sector cannot keep up with your production, you have a problem. Likewise, if your transportation sector has more capacity than you produce, you're also wasting resources. The success of this is simply the fact that while your industry was growing, the railways match up that push, and now railways have been moving lots of grain through the years. The long-term trend here, what you have is a description essentially of what railways are moving by type of products. And I guess this is 99 to 25, so it's obviously a very long period of time. You might know better than me whether this is truly reflective of the current environment. But what I simply want to show is that the service that our members are providing to your industry covers, many of the products that you are growing. Now, this slide to me is very interesting. I was speaking earlier about the fact that your industries has grown faster than others. And what you see there is essentially the Western Canadian rail traffic growth of agricultural products. So as you can see, the yellow portion has increased significantly in the total volumes as well. So that percentage of rail traffic moved by the Canadian railways has increased. So your value as a customer, a railway customer, has also increased during that period. So it's all positive for your industry, because I believe that it speaks to the fact that railways are listening when a conversation happens respecting your industry. Now, another interesting number is the long-term trend of traffic movement January to March. Why is it important? It's because essentially January and February for railways is the period where you have the most significant question mark. Are we going to have cold weather? Are we going to have tier restrictions? Are we going to be burning crews to move slow, short trains? So what's great about this graph is that, quite interestingly, through basically the last 25 years, Canadian railways have increased and improved their performance during that peak period by moving additional grains. You've got the exception of 2022, the low crop year, but other than that, essentially what's interesting here to see is that Canadian railways have followed the trend in terms of your volume production by moving more. And what I can tell you is that, I invite you to listen to the earning calls. Every quarter, railways report, and there are some analyst calls. But both railways speak about, we're strong on grain, we're moving lots of grain. There's a value to your product, and railways have taken that into account and are really moving more. I can assure you that now the Canadian grain fleet of upper cars is rolling. They're rolling loaded to the West Coast or coming back empty, but they're rolling. They're basically on service. So, and that speaks to the commitment of the railways. Common interest and solutions. Trade and tariffs, labor stability, regulatory burden, the permitting, supply chain investments. So I want to speak to that a little bit simply because, when I started this job, I started on February 3, 25. And you will remember that the US administration applied its tariff on what was that? February 1. So for a month, I was kind of debating what should we do as an industry? Should we jump and join the chorus and say, the US administration is this and that, like many did? We took a different approach. For a month, we did nothing. And it was not because we had no ideas or because we didn't think it was not important. It's because we wanted to make the right move. And I'm very glad that we waited. So what did we do? We developed a strategy about labor stability first. We wanted to join the Team Canada effort, really. So what is affecting the Canadian supply chain the most in recent years? Labor stability. In the last 40 years, on average, we've had a back-to-work legislation to force the return to work of railway employees or port employees every 2 years. The last time it happened, 2024, I'm sure you all remember that, May 24, our employees, of the two major railways were supposed to strike. Government sent a question to the Canada Labor Commission or Labor Board, delayed the strike to August, and then in August, they decided to use Section 107. During that entire period, the impact on Canada's trade was significant. Shipping lines were redirecting ships all over, US, wherever, all missed opportunities for the Canadian economy. So for us, labor stability is a big deal. And I want to stress the presence of Bill and Chris, I believe, at when they testified before the Senate Committee on Transportation in the fall to push for a solution to that. Thank you for being there. And basically, we were saying the same thing. So that's great. Thank you for that. Now, that's probably the most depressing graph you can look at. And I apologize for showing it to you. But it's important because it depends what we want to do with our country. The graph on the right shows the real GDP per capita growth in the OECD between 2015 and 2024, basically the last 10 years. So the positive people in the room will say, great, we've beaten Luxembourg, okay? And I suppose that beating a country that is not even the size of the city of Saskatoon, it might not be necessarily a source of pride, but to me, the key line there is the US line. While our growth was flat, they grew by what? 18%. Are they smarter than us? What's the difference? Why is this happening? So in March of last year, those are the questions I was asking economists. What's going on? What can we do? So we started this coalition, Moving Economies, let's level the playing field, with 3 simple asks. Unlock private sector investments through competitive tax policies such as accelerated depreciation or investment tax credits and infrastructure. What is accelerated depreciation? In the US, they call it bonus depreciation. You've heard of the big, beautiful bill. You've heard of that. Like beyond the fun and the funny part of this title, The substantive part is that in the US, whether you buy a combine or a locomotive, you get 100% tax deduction on year one of your purchase. So this is important. In Canada, what do we get? 10 or 15%, depending on the lifespan of the equipment. So that measure itself is providing a fiscal framework to the US that is making it more attractive for investors and that supports investments. Why? Because if you can write off year one your equipment, you'll buy more equipment next year. You will be more productive. Everybody will. So the Coalition Moving Economies regroups 11 associations, of which the CFA is an active member. And we have mining, we have railways, of course, we have automotive, we have basically all important sectors. And we're pushing for that because in our view, to lift the Canadian economy, it's important to have measures, a fiscal framework that will allow us to catch up the US and basically capture for everybody the benefit of that better economic performance. The second aspect was the one window for approval. So that is something that has been essentially done through Bill C5 by the government. We're waiting to see what the office based in Calgary will do, but for sure, C5 is certainly a step in the right direction. And essentially, the labor laws, the modernization, we're all expecting that the Minister of Transport will table something in the coming weeks that will bring stability to that. But I guess those three measures are where I would say 95% of the Canadian sector and the Canadian industries are aligned. And they are all critical because beyond our own specific issues, those are fundamental things that have a big change and a big impact for everybody, for every sector of the economy. So the resources again, I mean, you have other links there, so I invite you to subscribe to all of this, and I'll be glad to take some questions.
Leonard Junip, 3 with Armavanskoy. Through our RM, we have both railways. We have the CN main line that heads west. And we also have largest short line railway in Saskatchewan. We have their main facilities in RM, but we have a few rail lines going through our area. But the big question that I have is, when you look around in other countries and stuff, like we have double track system and here we don't. Like on the main line through, which heads to the CN main line, when we're running trains that are 2 miles long, well, so when they're stopping for one another, it's blocking our roads is a big thing. And they're sitting there, but if we tried to run our highways like that, only one road going one way at a time, the inefficiency is terrible. Is the government looking at helping these rails? I've brought this up before with them. They say the cost is just way too high to double track the whole system. Is that something that the government is going to look at helping, or do you know that is just to get these trains moving way more efficiently than what they are?
Yes, thank you for your question. I mean, it's an important one because it speaks to the capacity of the rail sector as well. It's clear that on most mainline you have double tracking. I would say that at this stage, railways are being an increment approach to the increase in capacity. Railroading is extremely expensive. The cost of doubling tracks is important. And typically, the way that railway companies do this is they will basically assess where demand has increased to the point where doubling the tracks, for example, or building a strategic siding can be important, and then they will do it. That's for sure. Now, I'd like to add to this question, because if I still have some time, I'd like to speak to the fact that presently we speak a lot about market diversification, okay, which is if we don't ship to the US, where do we go? East or west, right? Like those are our only options as Canadians. So on the east side, I'm comfortable saying that you've got lots of capacity. You have many ports, and the rail networks, basically east of Montreal are essentially have available capacity. On the west side, which is where most observers will tell you that the opportunity for diversification exists, there is a high pressure. You have the Port of Vancouver, the largest port in the country. You've got Prince Rupert. In those places, this is where it's important to think about how we can make more investments to remove the pinch points, to maximize the capacity. So to answer your question, I would simply say that market diversification for railways is important, but it comes with a significant consideration. It doesn't necessarily mean more rail traffic. It just means same traffic going different ways. And if you are to invest just to change where you're shipping your traffic, you need to have some support from the government on that. Now, I want to say, and accelerated depreciation, this is why I insist on that a lot, because in the US railways are benefiting from this, and they are truly investing. Canadian railways do invest $4.5 billion a year, but if we want to divest and be efficient and be the country we can be, there's certainly a part of it that requires some additional investments in the supply chain, and this is where a measure like that would come very useful.
Norm Hall. I guess I'm going to add to that question that was just asked, and you've partially answered it, but we're going to be growing here in Saskatchewan. BHP over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be virtually doubling the potash output. Oil is going to continue, and as your slide showed, ag is going to continue to increase. So with all of that, I guess we're looking at more investment out of the railways to move that. And of course, it's not all going to go west, but a good chunk of it is. What are the plans to match that capacity?
Yeah, like you have, the Canadian railways are very aware of this, okay? And they like to move a lot of things. Like in general, like without, like, I don't want to be funny about this, but in practice, it's clear that it's in the interest of everybody to produce more and move more. In particular, if, as I said, railways are moving half of the tonnage, so that's a lot of cars, a lot of trains, 5.7 billion cars a year. That's a lot of traffic. So clearly, railways need to, increase, and the manner to do this, beyond special projects, the way to do this is by increment. In other words, it's not necessarily to build a brand new line in the middle of nowhere. It's more to use what we have and increase the capacity of what we have. So that you're absolutely right. Those are similar questions, right? They all speak to how you increase the capacity of your supply chain. And, literature on this varies, but, personally, I'm absolutely convinced that the way to do it in our country is not so much to build a new line in the middle of nowhere. It's more to say, okay, as your colleague was saying, build a siding, double the tracks here. So when you do that, the beauty of it is that if you're doubling the tracks within the right of way, you don't need any permit. The Act, the Canada Transportation Act, is clear. You can build tracks within your right of way without a permit. So that way, this is super quick. You can decide basically in December when you're planning all the work that will be done in the spring. to say, okay, we're going to double the track, and then off you go. So it's kind of the regime for railways, especially within existing corridor, is great for that. Like the regulatory framework is very light. At the same time, demand just need to justify it. But that's the most, I would say it's the most efficient way to increase your capacity, because your cost is lower than if you need to assemble a new corridor, for example, and start from zero.
My question to you, and I'm going to put you maybe on a spot a little bit. But first of all, I want to thank you for a great presentation. But I want your opinion on Churchill. I didn't hear you talk about Churchill, and I'm sure you're aware of the billions of dollars that are being spent up there. And I'm just not sure how that's all going to work out for agriculture.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. The Hudson Bay Railway Company is a member of my association, and of course, in general, we're very happy to see that the Canadian government is looking at options to basically, support rail in that sector. I guess where the question then is, okay, what is it that you're trying to achieve with Churchill? Okay, are you providing a service to a local community? Are you essentially saying this will become an important gateway for our products? Are you saying it's going to be a military base that we will develop, as part of our effort towards NATO? So those are some of the questions. From a logistics perspective, I would simply say that the Churchill, for example, the Churchill tracks are a challenge. If you want this to be really a first-class port and rail line, you need to invest a lot to make that welded rail increase the speed and the capacity. The challenge until now for Churchill is the cycle times. I mean, when you go to Churchill, it takes more days than if you go to any other port. So in terms of using your assets, you're kind of, creating a longer period of time. So to me, what I would say here is that, I think we need to firm up exactly the exact purpose of what we want to do with it, and then spend money in accordance with that decision.
I think what we want to do is move grain through there, but I know it's owned by basically Harvey Gateway Group, which is made up of 37 First Nations, and of course they're interested in moving basically people from place to place, but they're also interested in moving minerals, and I understand that, but for us in northern part of Saskatchewan or central Saskatchewan and Manitoba, we're interested in moving grain to the port, and they've spent $26 million just upgrading the port. But there's lots of things. You take the potash industry, they can move through that port and not go through the Panama Canal and save $2 million
Right.
Shipload. So I think there's lots of opportunities there, but it just seems like, how do we get a broker up there? Because we can talk to the big four companies. They're not interested. They're worried about making money at their facilities, and they don't care what farmers pay for it.
Right. On that, I think, though, I agree with you. Like, what's clear is that what needs to happen is determining what niche Churchill will be in. What is the value proposition of that line and that port? And when that happens, then that's easy, because naturally, those that you're talking about will say, okay, let's go there. But it's something where how could I say that? In the transportation sector, a very obvious thing is that you always depend on your shipper. Canadian railways do not make or sell anything that they move. So we're there to support our customers to say, okay, we want to move products to Europe. Okay, then they shop their companies, they decide to go to Halifax, St. John, New Brunswick, or Montreal, wherever that is. But that aspect for us is always there as a support to customers who develop new markets. And to me, this is where, if in the case of Churchill, this is where I think the work needs to be focused on what is it that Churchill will offer as a value proposition that will make it attractive for everybody. Aside from the other conversation about defense and basically community service to the communities in the area as well, which are also very important issues and questions.
We got a roadblock. Railway congestion. Thank you very much for your presentation. I've got two points that I'd like you to address. I have a German friend that when he came over from Germany and watching and helping us deliver grain to a facility and going across country on gravel roads, and there are stop signs and yield signs, but mostly stop signs. And he says, you know how much power it takes to stop that truck loaded, or how much power it takes to get back up to speed once you've got to the stop sign. So that in regards to emissions and your members trying to deal with that, it seems like a logical thing that you would have sort of passing lanes and yield signs rather than starting and stopping. So that's the first issue. The other one is utilization of your infrastructure of car engine. In the last 10 years, do you have an idea what the turnaround time, say from Saskatoon to Vancouver, has improved, or has it decreased?
In the last 10 years?
Well, what have you got for grain movement there, and would be what that car turnaround time would be?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
As a farmer, before we buy bigger tractors, bigger air seeders, we try to make the best utilization of the equipment that we have, and that may mean running longer hours, having
Yeah,
you know, et cetera. But you mentioned about buying extra cars to store the product, and I know from what I've envisioned or saw in the Port of Vancouver, the bottlenecks that are occurred at the bridges to get to the port are extremely frustrating from a producer's standpoint, and I'm sure from yours. So that's the other area of efficiency increase.
yeah.
Thank you.
You know, it's clear to me that what you're talking about is basically the cycle times, and it's clear that over the last 10 years, you certainly have, if you look at basic metrics, which are, you know, miles per day, the dwell time, all those things, certainly there were significant improvements. I would say that where a lot has been done to try to improve the efficiencies, in particular at the Port of Vancouver, where for a while there were issues simply because trains would be leaving the prairies without any place to land, okay, because, you know, terminals were packed, the yards there were packed. So I would say that overall, in the last 10 years, there's been more coordination between railways and grain companies to be sure that when a train basically goes down the Fraser River, you know, that traffic will have a place to land. And there's been significant improvement. You know, in the last 5 years, the Port of Vancouver has seen steady growth in the volumes it has handled. And so therefore, progress is being made. Sometimes it's incremental, but certainly not, you know. Now, on the fuel efficiencies of railways, respecting your question, what I can say is that, you know, the carbon tax, as we know, was abandoned by the new Prime Minister. And for us, we're very challenged as an industry because we basically burn, like basically we take, I think, 4 times less fuel than a truck to move the same tonnage. So we were a bit surprised to see that our service was subject to the carbon tax because in a way we were thinking that we should not be to encourage people to move more on rail, right? But at the end of the day, it's been removed. I guess it's old story, but I just want to know that the work of APAS in that respect was successful. So I just wanted to say that in passing.
Down there in 314, you talked about legislative moves for better stability on railroad contracts. They also need to address that the companies, major companies, are not negotiating fairly on their contracts. They drag it out too. They don't negotiate properly. The management at the top of the railways has always been to drag things out, do things with the labor that they have. And if the labor doesn't like it, well, you'll go to the arbitration process and that could take years to settle things. So the labor on the top of the railways, the management, needs to change the way they treat their employees. It's horrendous. They come out and do all kinds of things and a lot of it's nitpicking. So they are not helping their employees to help them. It's been a very ugly way of doing labor in the last probably 20 years. Management has really changed. You talk about trains. The increases on trains have been robot trains, air cars, better rubber in the air hoses. But they were also lacking on their maintenance side. They were not doing good maintenance on their equipment. It's got better in the last few years, but it's still poor. These major railways cut all their feeder lines because the American Burlington Northern was doing it. So they cut all these branch lines, ripped them out, and lost a lot of their feeder lines. They had to go back and get those feeder lines because they were looking at core railroad revenues. And they forgot that the feeder lines give you revenue all the time. So we lost in Saskatchewan here, we lost about half our rail network. And our highways are paying the price for it. And you're right, the carbon tax should never have been applied. Carbon tax shouldn't be applied to anybody. It's anti-productive. Americans don't have it. We don't have a playing field. But you did the same thing with the cabooses. You took the cabooses off because the Americans were doing it. We proved that the cabooses were a safety issue or a safety factor that was way beyond the cost. But you also sold that to the farmers that they were going to get a better freight rate of moving grain, and that never happened either. So there's a lot of issues here that is being glossed over that people don't know.
Yes, thank you. I guess at the high level, I would simply say that to me, a couple of things have happened that show that sometimes smarter or less regulation can also derive better results. So to give you an example, the MRE, when the maximum or the revenue cap was established in 2000, railways were getting a contribution in the MRE whenever they replaced a government car. Now, at some point, railways, and at the time I was at CN, and I asked the CTA to give us a bump up if we bought more cars than the capacity of the government cars. And the CTA said no. So, you know, at the end of the day, after a lot of lobby and whatnot in 2018, the government finally said, okay. In other words, railways wanted to buy more equipment to move more grain faster and in greater volumes. And the government was saying, you can't. Or I guess you can buy the equipment, but you won't get anything for it. So, you know, why invest if that's the case? So 2018 was a great year for that, because to me, it shows certainly that from a regulation perspective, if you do it smarter and you basically support investments, the benefits you'll derive will be significant. And I think that, you know, the graph I showed about the performance of railways speaks to that a lot. Like to me, like I get it. In the transportation sector, regulations are necessary, but I also believe that, you know, sometimes we like regulations simply because they've been there for a long time. And that maybe we need to think about, are there better ways to do that? So, you know, I'm not debating, you know, your statements about what happened in some ways. But I would say also that my industry, like, would certainly take the view that its employees are well paid. Like, on average, our employees are paid 50% more than the Canadian average. I'm not saying everybody, you know, everything is perfect. There are many employees out there, many, you know, foremen and train masters and whatnot. But, you know, for sure, the unions in the rail sector are extremely strong. So, you know, I accept some of what you're saying, but I must say that sometimes in some other things, there are certainly a different view. But I want to respect your take on that for sure.
By the way, grain empties are still low in the priority coming back from the west coast. They're gonna put something in siding and run 3 trains by it, it's a grain empties. And that's a fact. Roughly, if things are working good from a grain terminal to the west coast and back, things are working reasonable. About a week, they can actually move a dedicated train from here to Vancouver and back.
Yeah.
It's more likely 10 to 14 days.
Yeah, you're probably right. Like the cycle time, like my guess would be 14 days. Like essentially what you need, if you take a train, like we've used that in one of our advocacy. We took a train, a notional train that would leave Winnipeg. And that train requires it requires 11 crew changes of 2 people. So that's basically 22 work days to go from Winnipeg to Vancouver and 22 work days to bring back the train. So we're talking basically a grain train that goes back and forth will employ for 1 day 44 people. So that's about right if you consider like your 7-day that you're suggesting here. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello? Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
Ernie Hall, RM 308. Just a future thought. How much more tonnage is the Port of Vancouver going to be able to pass through? Like we're talking about increasing tonnage going into the port, but they're pretty much filled up space-wise. So, you know, where do we go from there? Are we going to go south, stateside, or east coast is pretty slow?
Thank you for that question because I must say I asked myself the same question. At the Port of Vancouver, it is certainly true that you have no waterfront land available. In other words, the Port of Vancouver has basically leased the entire lands that they have on the waterfront. What's unclear to me, though, is whether all those terminals are really at capacity. Are they turning the number of times that they could if demand increased? And I'm not convinced it's the case. Like I looked at it because I was wondering, okay, like what do we do? Like Vancouver, how much more can it take, right? Like that's kind of a natural question. And I'm not convinced, frankly, that Vancouver is at capacity. My view of that is that many terminals could turn more in all sectors, by the way, not just ag, but you know, all other sectors. But I'm not convinced that they're all full capacity. So we have to be careful when we speak about Vancouver between the fact that they have no land available to lease or to rent to potential operators, and whether or not all those lands and all those terminals are indeed topped. And I don't think they are. Like that's how I would look at it. And as I said, for now, there's been growth there in the last 5 years in Vancouver. So it's kind of
I guess an aside, I never thought of, I wasn't thinking about was the movement of potash, if that's going to increase exponentially according to BHP. You know, that has to go somewhere as well, that increased production. I don't know which way it's
Probably a lot of it goes south anyway, but.
Look, I'm not privy to some of the decisions that BHP may have made in terms of where it will direct the traffic. I understood it was Vancouver from like simply reading newspapers and things like that. But in terms of arrangements, I don't know. I'm also very aware of the fact that CN is building a line to connect there. There will be dual served soon if it's not already the case. And therefore that volumes are expected to be significant to basically sustain, the double service there. So, yeah.
Maybe BHP will pull an Australia to build their own line.
Chris?
Devin Walker, RM 472 up in the Northwest. My question's a little more forward thinking, I guess. That's kind of why we're all in the room. My thoughts are around autonomous trains and remote operated trains. Perfect world, we alleviate some of the bottlenecks in Vancouver. We increase the port's ability to cycle grain and get the cars out of there. How do we increase efficiency using autonomy, and what kind of regulations and or tech changes or union changes are needed so that some trains can just sail straight through? In the past, I've heard, shouldn't say excuses, but too many level crossings, can't have autonomous trains, yet our regulators are willing to let autonomous semi-trucks on the road, which they're all level crossings and variable road conditions and so forth. So I feel trains should be autonomous long before trucks, because as an operator, what can you do with a train when there's a problem in front of you as it is? So what does that space look like, and what does the rail world need to change in order to make autonomous trains happen in the big open spaces? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess the short answer is technology, right? Like that's what it is. And because of the economies of scale in the transportation sector, small benefits mean significant return. So, there's certainly some consideration of that. I would say a few things. Like first of all, presently railways are like just one example. When a train departs, before departure, it needs to be essentially inspected and walked. And, now trains are super long, and it takes sometimes more than half a day to walk a train, essentially, to just check the OSIS and everything. So both Canadian companies have built portals, and that's very impressive. They basically run the train in that portal that takes a picture of the four sides of the train, and then that long picture of the train is sent to some computers, and through algorithms, they determine whether or not there are defects or deficiencies. And like the train basically wastes no time. It leaves when ready. And then if there's any deficiency or defects that are significant, it can always be stopped. But the beauty of that is that you've been from, issues like this to a big drop, because basically, and it's a fact of life, that machines are more reliable than human beings when comes the time of those things. There's no doubt about it. Now, in terms of autonomous operation, it's a different conversation. There is, first of all, the question of whether the technology really allows this. And even trucks, like there are questions about it. There is also another significant aspect. It's the social acceptance of that, because even though you go now and you say trains could be autonomous, I'm not sure that socially, our society is prepared to accept that necessarily. There's a lot of considerations of this. To me, it's one of those things, likewise, that is a matter of increment, which is how much improvement or by how much increment can we improve the efficiency. And in my view now, what we need is more investments in our infrastructure at pinch points than autonomous train. This is where the low-hanging fruit is kind of ready to be picked. And my view is that we should probably focus on that. Understanding that the rest is happening, our companies are developing new software and whatnot to support more autonomous work. But I don't see that happening like, from what we have now to autonomous, I don't see that happening. To me, it will be a progression and an increment based on the development of technology. Bill?
Bill Probylski, RM 245. You mentioned earlier, I think the number was $4.5 billion being invested by your members. Do you have any sense of how much of that is being invested into research? As Devin talked about autonomous trains, but I'm thinking more so in terms of efficiencies for grain movement, particularly, as you mentioned earlier, that the issue of the shorter trains and slower speeds during the winter, and we all know it gets cold around here in winter time. So any sense of how much is being invested in that type of research?
Yes. Thank you for your question, Bill. You know, there's no doubt that in that 4.5, you've got what I would call the classical railway stuff, like, you know, tracks, switches, signals, that kind of thing, those kind of things, and railway equipment, locomotives and cars. In terms of efficiencies and how they can be achieved otherwise, I would say that, you know, certainly money is being spent and has been spent. Like, for example, one example that would come to mind is, you know, at CN, we started publishing the winter plans. I believe that was 2018. And at the time, I think CN had not more than 10 repeater cars, which are basically cars equipped with equipment that pump air. So you basically put that car in the middle of your train, and you can maintain the air pressure to the standards of Transport Canada and keep your longer train. So I think CN at the time had not more than 10, and I think now they have maybe over 70, 80. CPKC likewise has increased significantly that. So to me, you know, I recall some people were saying winter comes every year and, you know, all those things. And, you know, you should have invented something to, and I would simply say that the way to achieve that, like, you can do all the research you want, but trains remain a very basic operation and a very, like, at the base, which is brakes and safety, you still have like what you have many years ago. And a total shift from air brakes to electric, for example, would be like, is almost impossible to even conceive. So in terms of interoperability, for example. So the way that railways are doing this, again, it's more small increments where, you know, more repeater cars, air repeater cars, such that then, you know, the trains can stay longer. Like, things like that are happening. But it's, you know, like, I have to say that, and there's a lot of money spent. The rail industry in the US is very active. Like, I'm like Carla, like, who I have to concede that the Americans do things good. They push research a lot in the US. They have like the benefit of having large railways. CN and CP are also members of the American Association of Railroads, contribute to that fund, and therefore are working on technology improvements. Like, the most significant thing that is happening now on the technology is more something, a safety thing. It's called enhanced train control, which would essentially be a technology that each locomotive would be equipped with, where if, for example, a train is going through signals and you cannot find a rational explanation for it, the train can be stopped automatically without even the help of the conductor and the engineer. So you have those small things that are happening, but I would say that overall, like, the big push to me in terms of volume is basically to say, when things are kind of humming and everybody's working well, then volumes are really up there. Like, this is how you achieve it. So that's how I think I see the world now in terms of technology. There are some research and small increments of improvement.
Norm Hall again. You talked about that 4.5 billion in investment. And I come from a railroad town, so I hear of all the the needs in the community. And there's been some work done on one line. It's Gowdy to Nipwood. And some of the rail and ties were replaced, but not all of it. It's a 10-mile-an-hour track. And so I guess on with that, I was just wondering what the division of investment is east compared to west.
East relative
Eastern
to,
Canada
Eastern-
versus Western
Oh.
Canada. Sorry.
I would say that, and you know, like, yeah, no, it's publicly available information, so can speak to it. You have like clearly significant investments have been made Western Canada by a big margin, simply because this is where you have most projects and you had most growth in the last 20 years. You know, when I worked at CN, I was based in Montreal, but spent most of my time on projects here. I was here many times in Saskatoon, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton. Like, this is where really the growth was happening, where projects were being pushed and volumes were growing. So this is where the money was invested. So basically it follows demand. You know, railways will not spend dollars where there's absolutely no benefit. Like, of course, they will spend money to maintain safety. That is not debatable. But beyond that, where you would see investments for growth, it will follow demand, really.
Jim Robbins, Sask Organics and Organic Federation of Canada. I think there's something that hasn't come up in the discussion of this thus far that is of interest to farmers in Saskatchewan. And that is, you pointed out that the railways deal with grain companies. The grain companies deal with farmers. Farmers don't deal with railroad companies. And you pointed out that that communication needs to be enhanced. But I think our worry as farmers is it's nice to see that volumes are increasing. It's nice to see that there's more efficiency as time goes by in the movement. I guess our worry would be, are those efficiency gains passed to us? Since there is that indirect relationship. Or does it simply go to shareholders?
Right. I want to answer your question, but my initial reaction would, you know, I could have a graph here showing you the progress through the years of Canadian rail rates relative to the revenue cap rates. And for all practical purposes, the MRE rates are flat because they're only, you know, in real dollars, they're basically just adjusted for inflation. So if you adjust that for inflation, you have a flat line for the MRE and you have a line that goes there for all other commodities. Okay. So having said that, the other thing that frankly I'm unaware of is, you know, I have no clue what grain companies give you. I have no clues about their margins. Everybody in this room can know the exact margins of the Canadian railways. What are the margins of the Canadian grain companies? So, you know, I don't mean to just say grain companies, blah, 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 but I just want to say that I really believe that if you look at the last 25 years under the MRE, the Canadian railways have done a lot in terms of investing and working collaboratively to find good commercial deals with the grain companies so that these efficiencies would be essentially would happen and would basically support the economy in the throughput. I think that is a given. But there's a part in this conversation that I must tell you that to me remains to be more explored. And is it if indeed we're to look at the structure of the ag industry and their role and the supply chain in that conversation, we need more info and data about other parts of it. That's my view of the matter. Because for now, what we know is that Canadian Railways have complied with the MRE since 2000. And then others that we're contracting with do whatever offer they give you. And this is not for me to comment on that, but this is the hard reality. But at this stage in the conversation, given the inflation of, you know, all the components of grain, of rail operation, that simply saying, give me your productivity gains, I believe, is not something that I would certainly be ready to accept. I think it would need a much more significant review of the entire structure to see how that cake is shared between the participants.